May we hold in our hearts all who suffer from the rages of war, past, present, known and unknown to us, and into the future. May we find a better way. Amen. So, back to the sermon. Harrison looking alternately between the TV news or straight out the window to his side. I asked if they knew what a chaplain does, and with May's continued focus and Harrison's indirect attention, I explained that I was part of the hospice team, that I worked with the nurse and the social worker to provide whatever emotional and spiritual support I might. May explained that they were members of the local church of their denomination, not Unitarians. And then I listened as May described the illness that had befallen her husband of 40-some years, what had happened when, and how it was treated or missed, or mistreated, or treated as best they could. And then her own health problems, which of course, in her telling, couldn't compare. Harrison broke in, his eyes still on the TV. I know what a chaplain is, having served in the Navy. In my day, you couldn't help it. They prayed over everything. I watched the news with him. May made her excuses to go to the back of the house and straighten up, while mouthing to me how Harrison needed to talk to someone, that he wasn't opening up to her. He was testing me. I didn't bite, not at first. He was checking me out, in part by my politics, always a potentially dangerous place to go. He wanted to know, well, if I was a racist, right off, or how much of one, I suppose, since in his experience and my own, all white people are, to one degree or another. I guess what I had to say sat well enough with him, and we got into history, and he still only gave furtive glances away from the TV screen toward my feet. After some time, it seemed to me that I should go. I'm wondering, I said, if I might visit again. Maybe spend some time with each of you individually, if you'd like. Harrison looked straight out the window again, and after a moment said, I don't want any preaching at me. I don't like that, and I don't want that coming in. I took that as a yes. And assured him that I would be mindful of that. Then, as I extended my hand for what I thought would be a goodbye handshake, Harrison looked me in the eye and said, it's a damn cruel thing to tell a man he's gonna die sometime, and then let him just sit there and wait. I sat back down and stayed a while longer. Harrison invited me into his life over the course of the next 7 months. I think he felt a bit proud that he beat the 6-month prognosis his doctor had given him. During these visits, we would talk about topical issues, politics, sports, the garden, his pain, his wife and children, the state of the medical establishment. We prayed together, sometimes all three of us. He was the first patient to whom I took to saying, if you go first, hold the light for me. And if I go first, I'll hold it for you, okay? And he'd signal, first in words, then with a nod, and finally, toward the end, with the blink of his eyes, okay. For many of those first weeks, he would ask me if I thought he was going to beat it and get better. He felt reasonably well. He thought out loud, how could I be dying? And through the weeks and months, Harrison came to live well. And when he died, everyone agreed, very well. Dr. Ira Byock out of Dartmouth offers a developmental model for understanding living with life-limiting illness. I think Dr. Byock would recognize in Harrison's process those landmarks. He had all of his business affairs tied up, making sure his wife would be well cared for and not burdened with all that business. His burial arrangements were made and paid for. No small matter, Harrison told me, in an African-American family where he said, to make arrangements while a person is still living is like giving up on them. He took it in his own hands. All was taken care of. He wanted it that way. He started saying goodbye to the outer circle of people he knew, appreciating them for their service or friendliness over the years. The postman, the barber, the grocer in his area, forgiving people as best he could who had in their way let him down or caused harm. And he worked on forgiving himself. We engaged together in what chaplains and social workers call life review, telling the stories of his life with me, as I'm sure he came to with others in his family, particularly some of his grandchildren to whom he could be the wise old grandpa and impart his wisdom. Harrison began to talk about his life as having meaning. He began to recognize the contributions he'd made to his community, his church, the meaning of his love for and from his family. And in time, his wife told me, he did open up to her just a bit about his feelings facing death. To her amazement, I think it scared her that he did, though it was also what she wanted, what she felt she needed to hear from him to be a full participant in this process with him. He came to a place where he could talk about what was next in an indirect way sometimes by talking about the people he loved who had died before him. And he wondered, will I be seeing them again? He cried on occasion, just a bit with me, and then he'd say, it's time for you to go. Not in an unfriendly way, just that he needed to cry privately. I understood. He came to see and say out loud what a shame it was that he was going to die, probably soon, that he wouldn't get to see the old homestead where he and May raised their 5 children, or go to his old fishing ground one more time until these worldly things seemed to fade from our conversation and apparently his attention. He came to wonder about what God had in mind, and after a struggle with what God was doing to him, came to talk about what God was doing with him. God as his companion and source of life. God as the one who was in charge, planning something big for him just ahead. This was in keeping with his deepest theology, and I supported him in that. When I returned from 2 weeks in service in Hurricane Katrina-affected parts of Louisiana and Mississippi, he was interested in hearing all about it, my stories of the people, the service snafus, the heroism, the shame. Toward the end, he expressed his appreciation for our visits together. I'd acknowledged how rich his life stories were about Navy life, about family, about the generations, how they'd fill a book. He told me, no, he wasn't going to write any book, but he thought I would write a book someday. That was his way, I think, of saying thank you. I told him if I did, I'd put his name in it, but that maybe I'd just write a poem, if that was okay, and dedicate it to him and my friend Robin, who also died around the same time, who had small children. He said he was okay with that. And I wrote that poem and read it to him, and he smiled broadly from his bed. And he kept it at his bedside, along with a box of tissues and a dwindling number of pill packs. Most of our time together came when he was bedridden, and I'd muscle a chair close up to his bedside and visit as he drifted in and out of sleep. As our conversations grew shorter, as his voice began to falter, he would fade. He was working, he would say, in his sleep, working on getting ready. Go ahead then, I'd say. I'll just sit here a bit and rest while you work. This is a success story that I'm telling you. Harrison's success. The success of one person with a supportive family, friends, and the hospice team to live a pretty, full, and apparently rich and satisfying last months. Coming to closure, coming to terms, letting in the feelings and experiences of love, not abandonment, by family, caregivers, by himself, and by his God. I was so glad that the family hadn't waited to the last minute and had accepted hospice care early on after the diagnosis. Many of you I know have been there with someone you love, so you know what I'm talking about. But it isn't always pretty and neatly tied up. I'm sure some of you know that as well from experience. In my chaplaincy residency at Georgetown University Hospital, one of the units I was on was the cardiac step-down, where people went as a next step after heart surgery or a major heart event. A man in his late 70s was not doing very well, and he went into cardiac arrest. The hospital staff responded to the code blue because there was no documentation of the man's wishes. And so they had to try to save him, even though they knew it would be a terrible process, not likely to give him much time if they were successful, certainly not improve the quality of his life. They'd have to go ahead unless they could reach his daughter, who had power of attorney, and explain what was happening and hope that she'd say no more. But she didn't. She insisted they do everything to save him, and she'd be right there. The team went to work to try to save him. And anyone observing would have seen how hard that was for them emotionally. The daughter arrived, and once outside her father's room, she heard, and she could see what the team was doing, what they had to do to follow her wishes, with tubes and machines and pounding on his chest, certainly breaking ribs as they did so. That's what happens. Well, she was horrified. She'd had no idea this was what would be necessary. And she called it off and let her father go. He did not have his wishes on paper, and she did what she thought was the loving thing to try to save him. And too often, families jump to that position, not understanding, for example, that, well, like feeding tubes, sometimes a person's body is shutting down and not able to take in nutrients. But feeding your loved one, in some families and certainly in some cultures, is absolutely the thing you're supposed to do. It's a sign of your love. But they don't understand that it can cause the person a lot of pain. If their bodies are no longer taking in the nutrients, it can cause them to suffer. When someone hasn't written down their wishes, it leaves families to come to agreement or not. When they can't, and when family tensions come to the forefront and family members argue what mom would have wanted, I assure you it is not pretty. Not at all. At noon, Gabe Meeker wants you to sit down with her across the way in the Tot Green room and go over the 5 wishes form, which is one of the many forms out there that helps you to document your wishes when you will not be able to speak for yourself. They're in writing. And your family gets copies, and your doctor, and your minister, and you have it written down. And mostly, it's not a guarantee, but mostly those will be followed in most situations. Even if you've filled one of these out before, these are documents you really, really should revisit periodically and sometimes do over. Why? Because your feelings might be different. Technologies might be different. The situation in your family, again, might be different. So even if you've done this before, I encourage you to go to the workshop today at noon and think it over. And we have some forms for those of you who are wanting one. You can fill it out today and have it witnessed. Just need 2 people to witness it. Or you can just go to the workshop, learn more about it, and just, even if you know, take the time to process it a bit and fill it out later. If you want, you can contact me and we can talk about where you might feel you're not so sure where to go, what to say. I'll be glad to sit with you and do that at a future time. And the other thing, of course, is to let everybody know. And that's why we're doing this now. Some of you will see family for the holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving or Hanukkah, Christmas, etc., etc. This is a time to do this, to make copies, and to talk to your family members. Give them copies and say, this is for real, these are my wishes. Discuss it with them. Hear if they have any conflict about it or not, or at least invite them to let you know if they do at a later date because the turkey's ready. To live until we die. You know, that could be a lifelong mantra, right? I think a lot of us, I know in my youth, I frankly didn't expect to live terribly long. My sister died at a young age. But here we are at our various ages, and we don't have to wait to take inventory of our lives and to look at what our wishes are for the living, for what we want to do. How many of you have bucket lists? How many of you have buckets with holes in them? Yeah. But you see, we get to do that, and if we are conscious about it and revisit the issues again and again, we can make adjustments. Circumstances may require it. But please, whatever your age, please have your wishes documented today or sometime soon, and Gabe will show you how. No need to wait to keep up to date with our whole lives. All reason to live as fully as we dare and as we will, whatever that might mean to each one of us, now and all our lives through. We are all, after all, living and dying, day by day by day. So may it be.